Nowadays, everybody seems like they have an agenda. And if you don't have one on the cusp, then part of it is you're searching for one, or you're not even sure you're complete or whole as a person if you don't have an agenda. And the agendas vary. They vary from extremely important to frivolous to damaging. It seems like today, more and more, whether we're talking media outlets or whether we're talking political pundits or whether we're even talking Christian communities, we seem to be so incredibly agenda driven. But one of the things that the Bible teaches me is that when you encounter Jesus, the right response is to drop all agendas and do His will. I'm in John 4 today. John 4 it's a passage that I have been enamored with for many years. I preached on it a while back. John 4 is the Jesus encounter with the Samaritan woman. It is interesting because John chapter 3 is the Jesus encounter with Nicodemus, the Pharisee. And what's fascinating is Jesus' encounter with the Pharisee, Nicodemus, ends almost in a tragedy, where Nicodemus comes and leaves at night confused. Whereas the Samaritan woman ends like a comedy, an uplifting ending for this woman who should not understand what is before her in comparison to Nicodemus, responds in a way that doesn't just deserve celebration, but also challenges me and my agendas. John chapter 4 begins with an invocation of the word Pharisees. Now, Jesus had learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. One of the reasons why John, the writer, brings up the Pharisees in chapter 4, verse 1, is because what Jesus is about to do in verse 4 is not kosher. It's not something that would be Pharisee approved. For verse 4 says, now Jesus had to go through Samaria. Actually, no, he didn't. A good kosher Jew, if they were going from Galilee down to Jerusalem or from Jerusalem up to Galilee, they would cross the Jordan River, go up or down, and then cross the Jordan River again, so they would bypass the region of Samaria. For a Jew, the Samaritans were considered half-breeds. They had intermarried years before. They were not pure-blooded Jews, which is worse. So Jesus goes through Samaria, even though a Pharisee would not approve it. The text continues and it emphasizes a couple of details. First of all, verse 6, it was about noon, and Jesus has sat down by a well. Verse 7, while Jesus is at the well, it says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water from the well, at noon, that was scandalous. She is there because she is not welcomed. Because you see, the women normally would come to the well in the morning time before the day got hot to gather the water they would need for the day so they didn't have to carry it in the hot sun. And that's also the time whenever the town gossip would be exchanged. A woman only goes to the well at noon if she's trying to hide something, to avoid the other community. You know how the exchange goes. Jesus asks for a drink. She then objects in verse 9, but you're a Jew and I'm Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink? Don't you know the issues? Verse 10, Jesus is like, if you only knew the gift of God and who it is that was asking for you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. And the woman's like, are you better? This living water, what you speak of, does that mean you're greater than Jacob? Then verse 13, but everyone who drinks of this water, Jesus says, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give will never thirst. There's this back and forth exchange that stretches on for about 15 verses, where Jesus reveals who he is and the woman offers a deflection. Jesus reveals who he is, the woman offers a deflection. Let's stop right there and just ask ourselves, how often does that happen in our own lives? God reveals who he is, and we respond with a deflection. Because you see, sometimes the very thing that we crave, we avoid because our agendas simply get in the way. Because our values of something other than God dominates the conversation. After this give and take, after Jesus even, in a sense, embarrasses her. Verse 16, Jesus says, "Go and call your husband and come back." She says, "I have no husband." He says, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband either." The woman says, "You're a prophet." And then finally, Jesus looks at her in a way that is piercing. Jesus says, "I," speaking about the Messiah, verse 26, "I, the one who am speaking to you, am he. I am the Messiah." Here is what I've been building to for the entire last 5 minutes. It's what happens in verses 27 through 30. Verse 27, "Just then, when Jesus reveals his identity, his disciples returned in surprise to find him talking with a woman. Ooh, but no one asked, 'What do you want?' Or 'Why are you talking with her?' Why? Because Jesus calls the shots, and the disciples have an agenda too, to become the greatest in the kingdom." Verse 28, "Then, listen to this phrase, leaving her water jar." Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" And they came out of the town and made their way toward him. Here's why I lingered on that phrase, leaving her water jar. That was her agenda. That's why she had come to the well. That is what prompted the collision with the Christ. Leaving her water jar, setting down her agenda, she instead embraced Christ's mission. Here's my challenge for you this week. What agendas do you have that are distorting the call of Christ in your life? Is it a political agenda, where you're so fit on settling the score against the Republicans or the Democrats that you simply cling to your water jar when the living water is trying to reveal who he is? What agenda is getting in your way? Is it an unforgiveness of a family member that did you wrong? What agenda is weighing you down? Is it your agenda of making money? Is it your agenda of making a name for yourself? Is it your agenda of getting the right worship music in the services the way you like them played? Whatever your agenda may be, come to terms with the fact that when you give your life to Christ, when you stare face to face with the risen King, the first thing you have to do to obey is leave behind your water jar. Because agendas distort, but the mission of God redeems entire cities. I love you guys. Have a good week.